Hi guys, welcome to the show. My name is Seb Ostrovich, aka the Voice of the People, and this is the Weightlifting House podcast. Welcome back to the Sinclair Countdown, where I count down the greatest performances by Sinclair of the greatest weightlifters ever to grace our sport, comparing athletes regardless of weight class or era to determine who had the greatest performance in the history of weightlifting. Of course, there are many factors not taken into account with the Sinclair formula, one of them being drug testing, which has changed a lot throughout the last kind of 30 or 40 years. There's a reason why a lot of records were set in 1988, for example, but nonetheless, a comparison of all weightlifters is very exciting and is what I aim to achieve on the Sinclair Countdown. Now, before we get started, I want to mention the house barbells are available with a 10% discount for all pre-orders. So, the bars are still being pre-ordered and they will be up for pre-order for about a week and a half longer. Once the bars are then being distributed out, they will go back up to their regular price. So at the moment, you can get 10 needle-bearing bars, 210,000 PSI, tensile steel, a hard chrome finish, which essentially prevents the bars from rusting, especially in places that are kind of higher in humidity. And they have a Ghost Sentinel, IWF markings, phenomenal bars, really phenomenal bars. If you want to pick one of those up, you can get them at weightliftinghouse.com. Okay, so on the last episode, I covered a few athletes. Most notably was Pyrrhus Dimas, the three-time Olympic champion from Greece. Now, as I mentioned at the start, ranking athletes by Sinclair only does not really accurately rank who the greatest is. Unless, of course, you believe that Sinclair is the greatest tester for greatness in the sport. I would argue that actually international wins, international gold medals and world records are more important. Others will say that it's only Olympic golds that are the thing that counts, and others will say it's world records. But it must be said that the best way, in my opinion, to rank everyone relatively fairly is through a simple Sinclair kind of formula. Who, pound for pound, lifted the most weight in one single performance is essentially what we're seeking for here. This week we're going to cover athletes, the 36th to the 33rd greatest performances ever, documenting 4 athletes' careers. And so, to start off this week, we moved to China for the 4th time actually in the show so far. It should have been the 5th actually, but I missed Tian Tao on episode 1. I'm sorry. So I'm going to probably have to go back maybe at some point and do a little Tian Tao special or just tag it on to the end of an episode. But I did miss out on Tian Tao. But this week, to the 60 kilo class we go with the very much underappreciated Chen LiJun, whose best numbers and performances, unlike many modern day lifters, hold up strongly to the standards set in previous eras of weight class. Chen is a modern day lifter. In fact, as far as we can tell, Chen LiJun is still lifting. Of course, with the Chinese national team having been banned recently from competition, it is hard to tell who is still on the team, and seeing as we haven't actually seen Chen LiJun compete since 2016, where he bombed out actually with the 143 snatch, it could be possible that he has actually retired. I guess we'll find out soon when the Chinese return to competition, but Chen is only 25 years old, born in 1993, and so to end his career already would feel somewhat premature. However, the Chinese national team never seems to have a lack of talent waiting to replace each great lifter, so you never really know. Chen LiJun is still relatively new to the sport, at least in an international sense. His first competition internationally was, in fact, in 2013 at the World Championships in Poland. Now, this was the year that Liu Xiaojun snatched 176 kilos for a world record in the 77 kilo class, beating his old world record of 175, and I guess which was beating his old world record of 174. And this was the first year that I was fully training the sport of weightlifting, and I can literally remember the exact moment I was in the gym as I watched the big TV on the wall and saw Liu Xiaojun break his own world record and then go on to make another world record in the total. Now, the story of that total is, of course, going to be saved for a later episode when Liu Xiaojun features on the show. But now, kind of back to Chen LiJun, who appeared on the scene in an astonishing fashion. He beat Kim Nguk, the lifter featured in last week's episode. And despite not snatching as well as Kim, who made 150 kilos in the 62 kilo class, for a first international competition, Chen snatched well, making 146 kilos, 7 kilos under the world record of 153, but going 3 for 3 in the snatch. Interestingly, the snatch world record of 153 was held by Shi Ziyong, but not the same Shi Ziyong who currently dominates the 69 kilo class. Instead, this is a Shi Ziyong from the early 2000s. Anyway, back to the competition. In the clean and jerks, Chen missed his first 2 lifts at 173, which would have been enough for the win had Kim then not managed to make 170 kilos. So, with only one attempt left, an attempt that would make him the world champion for the first time in his career, under incredible amounts of stress having missed 2 attempts, Chen LiJun went up 2 more kilos, up to 175 kilos, and emphatically made the lift, shocking Kim Nguk and announcing himself onto the international stage. A year later, Kim competed only once, at the Asian Championships. This year, Chen only snatched 143 kilos, which was 3 kilos less than the prior year, and 11 kilos less than Kim Nguk, who made 154 kilos for a new world record. Both lifters had improved in the clean and jerk during the previous year, both this year making 178 kilos, which left Chen LiJun in second place behind Kim's world record total of 332 kilos. Chen, therefore, clearly wanted revenge. In 2015 at the World Championships in Houston, it was the last time that we saw Chen LiJun post a total. It was that year, I don't know if you guys remember, that the Chinese men's team had a really bad run. 3 athletes bombed out in the clean and jerk, including Liu Xiaojun, whose gold-coloured Anta shoes could not even prevent him from missing every single clean and jerk attempt. But Chen LiJun had another idea. Somewhat, I suppose, miffed by his 2014 performance, Chen wanted to make a statement and prove that he was once again the most dominant 62 in the world. And not only that, but that he was the most dominant 62 since the weight class had begun. And so in Houston, Chen LiJun made a 150 kilo snatch on his 3rd attempt, a 4 kilo competition PR for him, and only a kilo below Kim Nguk. In the clean and jerk, Chen opened high at 175 kilos, making 179 on his 2nd attempt, which gave him the win over Kim, who had only made 177, both hitting competition PRs. And so, with 1 attempt left and the gold medal already in the bag, Chen took a stab at the clean and jerk world record, a record that had stood at 182 kilos, 400 pounds, since 2002, some 13 years prior. With this lift, he would also get a new world record in the total. And so, in spectacular fashion, Chen LiJun made the lift, setting 2 new world records, winning his 2nd World Championships, and placing number 36 on the all-time Sinclair list, with a total of 333 kilos at a body weight of 61.89 and a Sinclair of 474.8. The following year at the Olympics, Chen LiJun bombed, missing out on what might have been the easiest win of his career. With Kim Nguk banned by that point, Chen's biggest competition was Oscar Figueroa, who, despite having the performance of his life and really a deserved win, totaled 15 kilos under the 333 kilos that Chen had made the year prior. Next on the list is a man whose real fame, at least on the internet, came after his weightlifting career. Now retired from the sport of weightlifting, Andreas Behm of East Germany and later Germany has since become recognised for his recruitment and coaching for sprinting and hurdles. He now resides in the USA in Phoenix, Arizona. And honestly, very little exists about Andreas, though his career as a 60, 67.5 and 70 kilo lifter was extensive, spanning internationally from 1981 at the European Championships to 1996 at the Atlanta Olympics at 34 years of age. Behm never won the World Championships or the Olympics, though he did win the European Championships and set a few world records. During Andreas Behm's career, he would regularly total around 330 or 340, once actually in 1986 even totaling 347.5 kilos with a 152-195 performance as a 67.5 kilo lifter, even beating Petrov of Bulgaria. Now actually these are some really serious numbers, even by today's standards. In fact, that clean and jerk of 195 is gigantic. A lift that big hasn't been hit by even a 69 kilo lifter in the last 5 years, let alone someone weighing 67.5. But it was actually 2 years prior at an unidentifiable competition in Germany that Andreas Behm set his best total. Now, it seems ridiculous talking about a competition that I cannot truly verify and a total I cannot truly confirm, but a few records of it still exist online, and it is kind of widely acknowledged that this did happen at a competition in Germany. It was the same year as the 84 Olympics, on the 20th of July in Schwedt, Germany. I can only assume it was some kind of international friendly competition, though honestly I'm not quite sure. Now, bizarrely, despite his massive total at this meet, Andreas did not compete a month later at the Olympic Games. But in what I assume, like I said, was a friendly international competition, weighing less than 67.5 kilos, he snatched 155 and clean and jerked 197.5 kilos. This clean and jerk is one of the most underrated lifts maybe almost ever. If we put it into perspective with today's best lifter, Liao Hui, it is half a kilo less at 1.5 kilos less body weight. So clearly a more superior lift. If we look at just those lifts alone by Sinclair, Behm wins over Liao Hui with 266.1 versus 263.1. Now, while we're at it, 266.1 is not a bad Sinclair for your average lifter, and Behm did that with just one lift. So, for example, a 94 kilo lifter would have to total around 232 to get the same Sinclair. So what that means is, if you're a 94 kilo lifter listening and you snatch 100 and you clean and jerk 130, your Sinclair is less than Behm, even if he doesn't bother snatching. I mean, that is just simply absurd that as a 69 kilo lifter who can clean and jerk and out-total you, or at least outlift you by Sinclair, by just clean and jerking, if you total 100 and 130 in the snatch and clean and jerk as a 94. Anyway, this total of 352.5, only 6.5 kilos less than Liao Hui's, gave Andreas Behm a Sinclair of 474.96 and a spot at number 35. Next we have, at number 34, a 75 kilo lifter who is famous for several reasons in weightlifting. Of course, his big totals and world record is one of them, but another is the fact that he won the most intense, the most competitive Olympic Games of all time, the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea. I'm talking about the Bulgarian Borislav Gidikov. Gidikov's career was actually exceptionally short, competing internationally for a 3-year stretch from 1986 to 1988, arguably the most competitive 3-year stretch in the history of the sport. But unlike so many greats who were hidden behind the totals of the best evers, Gidikov was able to rise to the top amongst that era, and perhaps had it not been for his incredibly short career, he may well be more well known now, perhaps as one of the all-timers amongst the ranks of those like Varbanov, a man who, despite his top 10 Sinclair ever, was beaten by Gidikov on a multiple of occasions, specifically when it counted. In 1986, at his first international competition, the European Championships, Gidikov showed that he was a machine in the clean and jerk. Only 21 years of age, Gidikov hit a 200 kilo clean and jerk, which, along with a 157.5 snatch, gave him the silver medal. Remember, he weighed 75 kilos, and for a first competition, this really isn't bad. In fact, a 200 kilo clean and jerk weighing 75 kilos is incredible. But on that day, it wasn't even enough to win. It wasn't enough to beat Varbanov, a man who, when he gets it right, is pretty much the best middleweight lifter of all time. And on that day, Varbanov clean and jerked 212.5 kilos, which up until Rio was 2.5 kilos over the 77 kilo world record, weighing 2 kilos less. A clean jerk of 212.5 kilos, weighing 75 kilos, makes LiJun look weak. Anyway, a few months later, Gidikov geared up for his first World Championships. And clearly his training was going well because he improved greatly, adding 10 kilos to his snatch, making a massive 167.5 kilos, and another 5 on his clean and jerk with 205 kilos. This total, by the way, weighing 2 kilos less than a 77, is 11.5 kilos higher than the winning total from the 77 kilo class in Anaheim last year at the World Championships, won by Mohammed Ehab. 11.5 kilos higher than the winning 77 kilo lifter. But alas, once again, this was not enough to beat the dominating Varbanov, who, despite snatching less with 165, once again clean and jerked a massive 212.5 kilos, setting a world record in the total. At this competition, however, Gidikov did snatch a new world record. I didn't mention it before because technically it doesn't count. It's a record which, of course, does not count towards the total. in those days you could only make 2.5 kilo jumps. So, 160, 162.5, 165 and so on. But you were able to set a new world record by half a kilo that you would only be credited with the lower multiple of 2.5. So, with the world record at 168, Gidikov made 168.5, but was only credited with the lower 167.5. Anyway, a year later, Gidikov started winning, out-totaling his teammate Varbanov at the 1987 Worlds by a staggering 10 kilos. Feeling and looking strong, Gidikov headed to the 88 Games as perhaps the favourite, though it seemed clear to most that if Varbanov had one of those days, then no one, not even Gidikov, could stop him. But fortunately for Gidikov, Varbanov did not have one of those days. In fact, he kind of massively underperformed, taking the bronze medal. This left Gidikov a shot at Olympic glory, and not only did he take the gold, he would take every single Olympic record along with him. Gidikov snatched well, again making 167.5 kilos, winning the snatch portion of the competition by just 2.5 kilos over the silver medalist, but most importantly by 10 kilos over Varbanov. This was important because everyone knew that Varbanov had a world record holding clean and jerk in him. But in the clean and jerk, Varbanov did poorly again. Now, as this podcast is a podcast and you can't see the kind of gesturing that I'm doing, when I say poorly, it's not really poor. It's just for an athlete of the caliber of Varbanov, 200 kilos is actually kind of a poor lift for him. But Gidikov had the clean and jerk of his life, setting a new personal best and Olympic record of 207.5 kilos, totaling 375 at under 75 kilos body weight, 16 kilos over the current 69 world record total, and 5 kilos under the 77 kilo world record total. Gidikov's 167.5, 207.5 total gave him a Sinclair of 475.5. Now, from online records, it seemed that Bidikov never competed again. Now a world champion, an Olympic champion, a holder of 1 world record and 3 Olympic records, Bidikov retired a legend. Next on the list, a recent weightlifter who, during his short career, took the modern weightlifting world by storm. The Belarusian 105, Andrei Aramnau. Aramnau grew up poor. In fact, he remarked that most of his childhood friends are now either locked up, drug addicts, or dead. But he was very fortunate to have started weightlifting as a young kid, just 10 years of age. For those of you who have seen Aramnau lift, you will appreciate that his technique is some of the greatest ever. Not only is he phenomenally strong, he has gorgeous technique, which is why it's interesting to hear that he initially had awful technique and got away with having absolute just brute strength. And it was by making all the possible technical mistakes that he claims he developed such good technique eventually. One of the reasons I love Aramnau is that, despite having similar lifts to someone, say, Ilya, a slightly better snatch and a worse clean and jerk, I suppose, but he had gigantic training lifts, far, far superior to Ilya's. I suppose that this is one of the reasons why I love Ilya also, is because he actually waited until the competition day to give his best performances. Anyway, Aramnau said that for the first 4 years of his training, he was obsessed, staying in the gym for 6 hours a day until he was chucked out. The gym was almost like a sanctuary to him. He could avoid the pressures of drugs and alcohol that his friends had already got involved with. Aramnau told a crazy story in an interview that he did with All Things Gym. He said that because of the nuclear bomb in Chernobyl, he was born with 6 fingers on one hand and had to go by himself to the hospital to have it cut off. Apparently, if he didn't do that, his coach wouldn't coach him anymore. So once Aramnau began competing nationally, he broke every single record in every single weight class, every single age category, and every single lift. And so instead of walking away with, 3 national records at each competition, he would walk away with up to 15. 3 snatch, 3 in the clean and jerk, and 3 in the total, and then 6 for different age groups as he hit each lift. He was, an absolute prodigy of the sport. Now, before I go into his international career, I would really love to talk about his best training lifts. Of course, these don't really count towards anything, but surely any fan of the sport can appreciate the immensity of these lifts. His training lifts make basically every modern day lifter look like an intermediate lifter, and actually make the top 3 or 4 lifters ever kind of just look like rivals. All of his best lifts were done between the ages of 19 and 21. Okay, so Andrei Aramnau can snatch 200 kilos from absolutely any position. From the floor, different hang positions, from the blocks. He said that he snatched 210 kilos from the blocks, which is, by the way, 5 kilos more than Ilya did. and that he had doubled 205 kilos off the blocks. He even said that he would have done more than 210 kilos. He thought that he physically could have done so, but he was worried that he would have snapped his elbow. One of the most impressive things is that he said he snapped 200 kilos for a triple from the floor, which kind of makes his 200 kilo world record snatch seem a little more understandable. He also hang snatched 200 kilos for a triple and 205 kilos for a double. I mean, just basically one of the greatest snatchers to ever walk this earth. He has cleaned 250 kilos from the blocks, which is more than Ilya has ever cleaned, and clean and jerk 240 kilos about 5 times. Now onto some of his strength lists. He has front squatted 290 kilos, which is the same as Ilya and, crazily, the same as Dimas, who weighed 20 kilos less. He would back squat 300 kilos for 3 triples and said that he once had done 310 kilos for a triple. Now, here are actually, I forgot to do the overhead records. Here are some of the more amazing things he's done in the jerk. He has rack jerked and power jerked 260 kilos, 10 kilos more than Ilya ever did, and 24 kilos over his Olympic record. He also did a 240 kilo snatch grip power jerk triple, which is almost impossible for me to get my head around. And then lastly, which will blow all of your minds, I'm sure, he snatch grip power jerked, for one, 280 kilos, 14 kilos more than the heaviest clean and jerk of all time by a super heavyweight, and he did it at age 20 as a 105. Okay, so enough about his life and his training, onto his international competitive career. In 2007, aged 19, Andrei Aramnau appeared at the World Championships. He was almost entirely unknown at this point, and no one really gave him too much attention, but they really ought to have. Aramnau went 6 for 6, snatching 195, 4 kilos under the world record of 199, and 5 kilos above Dmitry Klokov. In the clean and jerk, Aramnau went 220, 225, and 228 to win in pretty devastating fashion, out-totaling Klokov by 12 kilos, 423 versus 411. And thus Aramnau had essentially made a name for himself already. A year later, everyone was in much better shape, which they really would have needed to be in to beat Aramnau. Klokov, looking back at 2008, once said that, honestly, no one really thought that much more about Aramnau. He himself was in much better shape and believed that it would be much more of a battle between himself and Marcin Delega, the current snatch world record holder. But as Klokov then recalled, after everyone else had had a few attempts in the snatch, Aramnau opened up at 193 kilos, and essentially immediately everyone else instantly knew that they were now all fighting for the silver medal. The gold medal was gone. Aramnau was a breed above the rest. Aramnau then hit 197 for an Olympic record on his second attempt, and then 200 kilos for the world record on his third attempt. In the clean and jerk, Aramnau did much of the same, lifting 225, 230, and then a new Olympic record of 236 kilos on his third, setting a new world record total of 436, a 6-kilo world record total. Whilst Dmitry had managed to total what Aramnau had won with the year before, 423 kilos, Aramnau had now hit 436 kilos, 13 kilos over Klokov and 16 kilos over Marcin Delega, who took bronze. And we basically never saw Aramnau again. He did a few European championships a few years later, but never really looked the same. Many say that he was burnt out, that winning absolutely everything by the age of 21 was too much for him. Others said that the effects of fame got to him, as he had won the Sportsperson of the Year in Belarus. Excitingly for us all now, Aramnau, now 10 years after setting the weightlifting world on fire, is back training. He admits that he has no money, and so training is now somewhat barren with no supplements, according to him. But he looks in decent shape, currently lifting around 170, 215, still a fraction of his former self, but one worth keeping an eye on. Never underestimate the work ethic of a 20-year-old who tripled 200 kilos in the snatch and put 280 kilos over his head. Aramnau's 436 kilo total as a 105 gave him a Sinclair of 475.6, and a spot at number 33 on the all-time Sinclair list. Now guys, that is the end of this week's episode of the Sinclair Countdown. I really hope you liked it. I had a great time researching all the lifters for this episode. If you did enjoy it and you really appreciate it, then feel free to share the podcast with other people who you think might enjoy it also. I'm just trying to rack my brain if there's anything that I need to mention. Of course, Weightlifting House barbells, the best barbells in the world. You can find them on weightliftinghouse.com. And other than that, I don't think there's a whole lot. For those of you who only listen to this show and not the others, it's worth mentioning, because you might not have heard yet, Glenn Pendley, the People's Coach, and myself are doing a few seminars in the UK during the summer. Ireland on the 28th of July, and then 2 spots in England on the 4th and 5th of August. I'm fairly sure those dates are right, but I'm not quite sure. I think they are. Links for those will be up kind of in the next few days, next few weeks, that kind of thing. So stay tuned for that. Other than that, I think that's about everything. I think it is. Guys, thanks once again for tuning in, and I'll speak to you all next week.